So the way Daniel joined Wild Leaders, we ran into each other on a plane. Some of you know this story, but we were on a plane. He had a seat next to him. I walk up, and he was working for a significant in a leadership development role in a significant organization. And I walk up, I sit down, and he asked me this. He says, "What's the next move for Wild Leaders? What is the next big thing?" And I said, "It's a person." And so then we started talking about the person. And at the end of that conversation, where he just happened to have a seat next to him on the plane, remember we were heading to Chicago, Dr. Halleck, and I said, "Hey, what about you?" And it created just a series of conversations. Has been such a privilege and honor to lead with him. And it's just been, to describe Daniel, he's a scholar. This is what is so weird about people like Daniel and people like the rest of our Wild Leaders team. He's a scholar, scientist, and a theorist. He's a published author. He is a commercial strategist. He integrates science in a way that it's bottom shelf for people like me and the rest of us who want something to make sense. He has unbelievable experience in corporate, not-for-profit, and higher ed settings, which is a lot, and in mid-cap kind of market settings, and that's kind of the leaders we serve so often are in those spaces. And most importantly, he is someone who we go to battle with every day for the life and the inspiration of courageous and sacrificial leaders in our influence. And he lives these topics out constantly. Those of you who know Daniel, know what a wonderful person he is. But most importantly, this is his 3-year anniversary at WiLD. So I don't give gifts well. I just don't do that. So Daniel, I wrote you a brief song. And this is it. So it goes something like this. Dr. Halleck, happy 3-year anniversary. We're grateful you are our whole leader catalyst today, and that you will light our brains up. Here's the melancholy part. Make us feel something. Something smart though. Dr. Daniel Halleck.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Thank you, team, for surprising me. That was completely unexpected. And how can I follow that up? Thank you all. It's been such an awesome 3 years. So on that note, I'm excited to get into this topic today on innovation through others. I want to start by sharing a question that I'm going to come back to a few times throughout our talk today. And then we're going to set us up for a deeper conversation for you all together in those breakouts. Here's my framing question. What would change if you were creatively stimulated to think in novel, innovative ways by people who see the world differently than you? Let me say that again. What would change if you were creatively stimulated to think in novel, innovative ways by people who see the world differently than you? As you all know, WiLD, we are all about whole and intentional leader development. And part of every leader's whole story, including my own, is the network of people that surround us, both personally and professionally. Without those intentional relationships, we're not able to lead at our full capacity. And quite simply, none of us can lead alone. No one has all the capabilities to become the self-reliant leader. We need people who are going to challenge us, encourage us, advise us, and open up doors for us. At the same time today, there's something interesting happening. Every time I talk to leaders across industries or sectors, I'm hearing this theme about how the world of work is changing. And many people are even referring to this as being in the middle of the next industrial revolution that changes the way that we actually think about what it means to work. And so as leaders, the need to iterate, to evolve, to shift our strategies, to keep our priorities changing, to keep pace, may never have been higher for many of us. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about leaders in higher education, government, technology, manufacturing, not-for-profit, global enterprise, or small family-owned business. With that constant need to change and adapt, as leaders, many of us are being pressed to innovate maybe more than ever before. And one of the ways that we can increase our capacity and develop ourselves to stay on top of that rapid need for change is to foster innovation networks and innovate through other people. So a minute ago, I said when it comes to leading, we need to be surrounded by people. I believe we need to be surrounded by at least 3 broad types of relationships. People who support us, people who help us strategically, and people who stretch us. The support, we often think of mentors, those who advise us and guide us, or people who might be social and more emotional support in our personal life. We can go to them when times are hard. Strategically, we often think of advocates or sponsors, people who can open up doors for us or create opportunities. Or maybe it's a career contact, somebody who's kind of a loose connection you might have known briefly, but they might bridge the gap to your next opportunity. And then there's people who stretch us. People who give us feedback are one that comes to mind. Who's going to tell you it straight, tell you like it is, and give you honest, challenging feedback. And then lastly, people who challenge and increase and widen our perspective. And that's what I want to focus on today. People who can expand our perspective, especially in the midst of dynamic change. I often refer to these types of people as our idea network. The relationships that help you push the boundaries of your assumptions, stimulate you to think in novel, different ways, and quite simply, see things differently than before. So back to my question, what would change if you were creatively stimulated to think in novel, innovative ways by people who see the world differently from you? That's the idea network. If you have anywhere in your work right now where you need to generate novel creative solutions or drive innovation or have the innovative change, whether it's inventing something new or innovating and iterating on something, then one of the developmental advantages is having this cadre of people who challenge biases, stretch your cognitive flexibility, and push you to think in new and divergent ways. These are people who bring us new information, but they also stretch the way we think. And the best part is, in many cases, these are people you and I already know. We just often haven't intentionally tapped into their genius. This is something that if you've ever been in a business school or seen a case study on innovation, a firm that comes up often is called IDEO. And they're down in Southern California. They're recognized as pioneers in the whole human-centered design movement. They basically got put on the map by doing some early landmark work for Steve Jobs at Apple, but their ongoing methodologies was kind of kept them at the forefront of innovation and in countless case studies for innovation. They do a lot of things to innovate, but one of the cornerstones of their process is that they pull people together from a wide range of divergent disciplines to solve multidimensional, multidisciplinary problems, complex stuff. And by pulling this myriad of perspectives together, they move beyond a myopic singular point of view to bringing fresh integrative thinking that they apply to things like product design, business models, social issues, even educational systems, and a whole host of other things. It's really about getting out of the silos and the echo chamber that all of us have and challenging old assumptions about the way things have been. As a side note, it's actually one of the reasons I love this WiLD community that you are with today, because as you already saw in the breakouts, every week when you join, you get to connect with divergent people like this. On any given week, we'll have presidents of universities, professors, CEOs of family-owned businesses, professionals in corporate or even national security, professional athletes, leader development experts, graduate students, pastors and spiritual leaders, technology nerds, scientists, animal welfare leaders, engineers, professionals, and if I missed you, any other discipline under the sun. And I love that set of divergent thinking because it challenges you to think in different ways. And that's what the idea network is really about. And it helps us to stay ahead of, or at least keep pace with the dynamic change and ambiguity that we're all facing. So back to my question, what would change if you were creatively stimulated to think in novel, innovative ways by people who see the world differently than you? The exciting lesson about how IDEO convenes and cultivates creativity is that you do not need a world-class design firm on call to start to be able to expand your perspective through conversations that catalyze your thinking and stretch your capabilities. most of us already have those people at our fingertips. I mentioned earlier, we need relationships that stretch us, relationships that support us, and relationships that are strategic as leaders. When it comes to stretch, I mentioned two pieces, feedback and perspective. Let me tease these apart a little bit, and then I'm going to go deeper into what does it look like for us to challenge it and increase our perspective to drive innovation through others. Because I find that oftentimes we conflate it with feedback. Now, feedback is critical. These are the people who are going to help you really put a mirror up in front of you. Both feedback and perspective share a common factor in the sense that they increase your self-awareness, and those relationships increase your awareness of others or the world around you. But I find that feedback is more like a mirror and perspective is more like a window. So I have people in my life, in my family system, and on the WiLD team right here today. If I'm not acting in a way that's congruent to my values, or if I'm just botching something up, they are going to gracefully or forcefully put a mirror up and say, this is what you look like right now. Here's input on where you need to change. And that's critical, because if I didn't have that, if we don't have that as leaders, we don't know what we look like. We don't know where we're strong and have competence or where we need to grow. Similarly, the idea network also brings perspective, but not in the same way as a mirror. It's less about, here's something I'm working on, give me feedback or tell me how I'm showing up. This is less like a mirror and more like a large, expansive picture window frame. So if you've got a favorite lounge spot or restaurant or coffee shop or someplace you go to where maybe you get some thinking done, or you've seen a great big window, you've got this experience where you're sitting there and the window is designed in a way that it actually draws your gaze outside of the built environment into the expanse in the distance. And so instead of looking at yourself like a mirror, your focus is projected away into new possibilities. The relationships that stretch us, the idea network, is much more like those windows that provide a perspective expanding view into places you might need to go. So who are the people who are the windows in your life, at home, at work, in your community? Who helps you think in new and different ways that open up possibilities? Oftentimes we have these people around us, we just haven't asked them. They are waiting to be asked, but they provide incredible possibilities. If I could take the analogy even further, some people aren't just windows into possibilities. Some people actually set up a telescope so we have an even further reaching perspective that could even change the trajectory of how we do our work. Like Rob mentioned, this is my WiLDversary, my 3 years with WiLD today. But my WiLD journey really started about 10 years ago. I was actually a client, many of you know, with WiLD before I joined the team. So I've had the chance to see some of these moments with our team, both from a distance, but also in the last 3 years being an intimate part of the team myself. And one of the things, we've had a lot of reflective moments like everybody, right? Where you get the mirror, you do some self-evaluation, you get some feedback on how you can continue to iterate and change. But we've also had some pretty special moments, not just of reflection, but actually of refraction, carrying our gaze to places we hadn't seen. One of those examples was the genesis of our WiLD Foundation. Megan mentioned earlier that WiLD Summit in September, a celebration of whole leader development, where we are setting up an opportunity to celebrate everyone's growth, this community, and be able to have an opportunity to fund leaders who have a deeper need for leader development. And it's become one of the most meaningful parts of our work. It's a separate 501c3, but the intersection with our work has been incredible. But it did not come out of a great brainstorm session. It did not come out of our strategic planning, even though we do that on a regular basis. It actually came from somebody in our idea network. A number of years ago, Beth, who is a friend of our firm and an executive director of a foundation that was set up from a hospital, encouraged Dr. McKenna to consider what it would look like alongside our LLC, WiLD Leaders Inc., that's the business here that runs these sessions, to have a separate incorporated 501c3 that would parallel the organization. And she said, hospitals have been doing this for years, creating multiple funding pathways for different populations. For example, Rob and I would go around the country and people would say, we had one guy come up to us once and he said, after going through our process, I've got 100 Syrian refugee women who need this. Will you serve them? And we're like, yes. How? How am I going to bring our coaches and facilitators to be able to serve them and make that happen? And so Beth's suggestion triggered new thinking in our team. And 5 years later, the WiLD Foundation existed alongside WiLD Leaders Inc., serving different populations of leaders with a system for whole leader development, where if a leader had a passion for what we do and had resources, they could actually give to leaders in need. And this idea was novel to us. That model was completely novel to us, but it had existed in other industries for a long time. All we needed was a catalyst conversation with somebody like Beth, who opened up our thinking to things that we had never considered. It just wasn't in our mental frameworks. So what would change if you were creatively stimulated to think in novel, innovative ways by people who see the world differently than you? In the same way that when you travel, it expands your thinking, you experience a new culture, a new location, new food, you see how language shapes and we are shaped by. Meeting with people in diverse industries, divergent fields, or from widely different walks of life is one of the things that fosters the conditions for creativity to flow. So who is a friend of yours who is trained in a completely different field? Who do you know that has a completely different worldview or life than you? It's often those unlikely characters who trigger your thinking or offer an unconventional approach that help you see the whole story. And the best part about these conversations is they're both reciprocal and recursive. They're reciprocal in this mix of learning and sharing because you're probably just talking shop. It's less about help me solve my problem. It's probably more about tell me what you're doing. What are you learning today? What's happening in your industry, in your space, in your company? Let me just learn about what's exciting to you. And they learn and share from you. But it also triggers something that's recursive. It's ongoing, it's generative, because when we develop those relationships, it actually develops the ability for us to continue to innovate and learn and grow. In the same way that building stronger muscle allows you to then build stronger muscle, having an idea network and those catalyst conversations triggers inspiration and motion. We all know somebody who is incredibly creative and they seem to always have a steady stream of inspiration. Those people had, one of the things they often do is by design or not, they are learning and getting cross-pollination from divergent perspectives. So one of the reasons that if you look at artists, some of the most creative artists get their inspiration not from their own discipline, but from others who are using a completely different modality. And they cross-pollinate and take those ideas back and come up with something that they had never even conceived before. So these conversations are energizing. They're the chance to talk shop with somebody. It's not a place where you're just solving a problem, although that could be it. It's getting not just the confirming evidence. As humans, the research suggests we always look for confirming evidence about what we believe. Disconfirming evidence actually changes our perspective. So who are the people you can get diverse viewpoints from across industries, disciplines, age, race, social economic status, political viewpoint? Pick your category. The people who open up our world to see a more complete picture. Where do you need a different perspective in life, a fresh perspective? And who can give you that new and fresh frame of reference? Again, it might not be the person you expected at first. When we invest in this developmental network, this part of our network, this perspective, this idea network, it often opens up possibilities that we never knew existed, and it helps us, especially as there's more complexity and decreasing clarity. If there's one thing that leaders I'm talking to are seeing, it's that they have more complexity, less clarity, but guess what? People want certainty and clarity from you. So how do you navigate those two together? So the ability to generate innovation can help us set the pace or keep the pace and continue to make impact for ourselves and for those who are in our circle of care. As I said at the beginning, a healthy developmental network, a healthy mix of relationships for a leader has a tension. There's similarity and diversity. We need people who are similar to us. That's another talk. We also need people who see things differently. And what's powerful about having that idea network is you can get into those conversations that allow you to feel boundaryless, even if only for moments. There are moments when in those conversations, or as we start to innovate and create, because creating things is a deep part of our human experience. And so not only does it help us innovate or keep our organizations going, but it actually can inject a lot of meaning, purpose into our work and help us to create value to make an impact on the lives of people beyond what we could have considered. Change, uncertainty, volatility, pick your word. That might be what triggers us to start thinking of getting perspective. But the very act of creating and making and innovating in collaboration with others and that learning process of curiosity might be what actually continues to help us sustain with others. So let me give you two implications, two practical takeaways, and then we're going to get into a conversation. Here's the first one. Pay attention. If you notice at the end of every one of our breakouts, we'll do it in a moment, we ask a question that says, what was worth paying attention to? And our hope is that as leaders, we can start to grow attuned and pay attention to things that might be moments that matter, worth paying attention to. And so just start first by looking around you and saying, where are the places where I could maybe learn something and have my perspective challenged? I recently had a conversation with a leader who's involved in formula racing. We're not involved in formula racing at WiLD, but something he said completely triggered the way he described his involvement, opened up a possibility for us with WiLD of ways we can even more effectively serve leaders like you that I never considered. And we're not in racing. So pay attention. There's always something to learn. And second, set up some catalyst conversations. A lot of times we spend most of our time in our default network, the rhythms and contours of what our life already exists with. So start with something easy. Who are three people you might know who see the world completely different than you, who might expand your thinking? Set up coffee, grab a lunch, have a Zoom call. You don't even need to have an agenda. It doesn't need to be solving a problem. It could just be having the posture of curiosity to start to learn from them and connect. And you might find down the line, you continue to have ideas and innovations that come to you that you might not have considered. So I'll revisit my question again, and then we're going to get into our breakouts. What would change if you were creatively stimulated to think in novel, innovative ways by people who see the world differently than you? All right, we're going to get into those breakouts.